Okay. Welcome, everybody. How are you guys doing? This is so exciting. We made it. I sort of feel like a rock star right now, which is really crazy. Thank you guys so much for coming here. Really absurd panel of people here who are coming out to talk to you. And then there'll be a performance after that, as you may know. Hold your applause for now. I'm David Ehrlich. I'm the senior film critic for IndieWire. Thank you, everyone, for coming. We have a truly absurd panel of people here who are coming out to talk to you. And then there'll be a performance after that, as you may know. First, I would like to introduce musician Natu Lab Sabaki. We also have with us tonight Nigel Godrich. We have Shai Ben Zur. We have director Paul Thomas Anderson. And we have Johnny Greenwood.
Hey guys, where?
Have a seat. We have enough seats for everyone? Great. All right. So first, I just want to thank you all for being here and for making something, both the music and the movie, that reliably makes me very, very happy, which is an increasingly difficult and appreciated thing to do in the world that we live in right now. And I was struck by the fact that early in the movie, somebody holds a sign up to the camera that says, "Have a great time." And it sort of seems like joy was the prime directive of this entire process. And I wonder if for all of you, for the musicians, for the filmmakers, for the producers, and so on, if there was a way to sort of let this be guided by joy in a way that your usual creative processes don't necessarily allow.
That's a really good question. Johnny?
I mean, a lot of the music is very... Is this one? A lot of the music is very joyful because it's all devotional. It's all very uplifting, and it's about, praising the saint. It's very... And the whole atmosphere of the recording was like that.
I think it's not sort of our usual everyday. It's not what we usually do, is it?
It's not a radio session.
No, it's not. The sign that said "Have a good time" was put in the flight case by Radiohead's big chief tech, Plank, who helped us pack everything up before we left. And I think it sort of kind of articulates very well the whole idea of us. We're all just going on this trip, and it's a mystery, and we didn't really know what we were expecting from our point of view. You knew what to expect, but we didn't. And so it's like, have a nice time on your holiday, that sort of thing. But that was what that was. And I think he's right. I think that we ended up just having a very nice time. Indeed, it was an amazing experience. And when I've said this to people before, but I think it's one of the best things I've ever done in my life, is to go on that trip. It was really incredible. Shai was amazing, an incredible host for us, and did all these incredible things, opened these doors for us. Paul is Paul, and Johnny is Johnny. It was like very, very good company. So, there you go. I'll start to cry in a minute. Paul?
Next question. I think that answered it.
Very well.
There's probably plenty more, right?
So as much as I appreciate the fact that the movie is light on context and we really just sort of get into the experiential element of it, I am curious about not only how Shai and Johnny first connected, but also at what point, Paul, you were brought into the equation. Was it a question of them from the beginning saying it would be great to document this, or did you hear about it and beg to come along for 3 weeks in India?
Well, working backwards then, so how obviously I know Johnny, and Johnny said, "Do you want to go to India?" And I said, "Yes." And then I said, what are we doing? I would backtrack it into whatever he had an idea for, would be interested in doing. But then it got even more interesting when he introduced me to Shai's music. But then it got even more interesting when Shai would send videos of the brass band rehearsing. They'd gone somewhere to rehearse and they were practicing, and he was sending videos to him, and he was sending videos to me, and then everything just became this like a travel brochure where you can't believe what's coming to you. You're like, really? This is getting more and more exciting. So the question of how these two met, I would leave to these two.
Well, I remember I was playing in Calcutta. I actually remember it, and I got a phone from a friend who knows Johnny, and he told me that Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead heard my music, and if I would like to meet Johnny. So I was very happy about that, and now we have a project. So,
What happened in between?
It was actually a very embarrassing thing of me watching a band play and them not being very good. And they played one song that was great, and I thought, fine, you know when you see something and you feel like you have to say one good thing, and so you latch onto it. So I latched onto the song. So that last song you played was amazing. That was music. And they said, yeah, we didn't write that. That's by this guy called Shai Bentil. So that's the first time I heard his name, and I just followed that through and eventually met him.
Good that they made that recommendation. Led us to some good places. I mean, it's funny watching the movie that so many of the things that would usually be maddening in a traditional filmmaking environment or in a music recording environment become blessings in this movie. I think about the power outages, which are great texture for the movie, or the birds in the studio, which actually made it onto the album that came out with the movie. Or the fact that the camera is you're constantly adjusting the camera, or whoever is behind it at times, and you're looking at the shadows. And I think of Jack Horner from Boogie Nights, and life has shadows. And I mean, I wonder if it was liberating to embrace an anything goes mentality when Radiohead music and when your films and Shai, when the music that you were making beforehand is maybe a little bit more circumspect. If it was freeing to just sort of roll with it.
from a musical perspective, I think one of the interesting things, I've been working with Indian music for the last 20 years. I've been living in India for 15 years. And I think when me and Johnny, after we met, so after that conversation, we met, and we didn't meet with an agenda to do anything. Johnny, we just met to talk about music, and it was a very fascinating meeting, and became friends, and somehow the project evolved in a very natural way. And when Johnny came in also to produce the album, and then after when he got Nigel also to come and build the whole studio. So one of the things that I remember that was that happened in the initial stages is that we kind of drew lines of borders of what we shouldn't do. And Johnny was insisting that we shouldn't use any other Western instruments besides the instruments that either he plays or the guitar that I play. Which means that I thought, okay, we can bring, I know, a great drummer, or do you want to bring maybe some string sections? And he said, no, we should just narrow it down to the Indian musicians, and then we even narrowed it down more to Indian musicians from Rajasthan. There's so much different types of musical traditions and cultures in India. And after that, also, Johnny was listening to the compositions, and he thought the architecture of the compositions in themselves, they are made in the realm of North Indian music, which means they use scales, which we call rags, and the aesthetics of North Indian music is based on these scales, wherein a lot of Western music aesthetics are based on harmonies and chord progression. So Johnny was insisting that we should bring in Western elements that are more rhythmical or different kind of patterns, and not to use the Western harmonies And if to use some chords, it was in a very delicate manner. So this sort of a discipline kind of made everything very fascinating. And like you have some sort of, at least for me, I felt that suddenly we had these limitations, and because of that we had a lot of freedom to explore within the limitations and already kind of have some sort of a structure. And then the rest was just glorious feeling of playing and enjoying music.
I mean, put in a very crude way, in my head I just thought this is like the JBs, it's like a James Brown thing in a way, you know, it's that ecstatic, and there are no chords, there's no major or minor in Indian music. It's very peculiar to someone who's used to playing with Radiohead and coming up with chord sequences. Is you can't rely on that, and as soon as you start imposing chords on this kind of music, you pin it down in a not very nice way. You force melodies into being, to having some kind of harmonic language which they don't really have. They're more ambiguous than that, and that's why it's such a curious thing for me. So interesting.
Nigel, two questions. The first is there anything that Johnny can't do or can't play?
Oh yeah, come on.
Lots, yeah.
Great. Maybe one day we'll find out what those are. Not today. And the second question, I guess, is you have recorded, with Radiohead in some spectacular locations in the past, from Jane Seymour's mansion to wherever the pigment factory in France you went to for Moonshade Pool. But if you took that band and locked them up in an Indian fort for 3 weeks, or anywhere for 3 weeks, would it be fruitful? Would it be productive in that way? Or was this a unique scenario in the sense that something great came out of it?
I think the power cuts would drive Tom crazy. He'd go insane, wouldn't he?
I mean, when we started talking about doing it, and Shai, like Paul was saying, was sending out all these videos of the horn sections, and Johnny was explaining basically what the kind of idea of the project was. We were discussing, recording how to do it and where to do it. And there was, it went from in the desert. There was a very generic in the desert, like we go out into the middle of nowhere, which I said, well, that's just not really possible, to, looking at what was available in terms of studios and stuff in India. And there really wasn't anything that was applicable. I mean, unfortunately, there probably were studios that we could have used at one point that just don't exist anymore, or I don't know. Basically, and like you said, I'm used to, we've built studios in very weird locations in the past, never abroad, but certainly in England we've done that quite a few times, and it's always very fruitful. I mean, it's exactly, the reason to do that is to create an ambience in a place that's never been used as a studio before. You really do get all sorts of things happen that you cannot explain and are some nice surprises. This was so the idea was to just say fuck it, put it all in a box and just ship it all out there. And we were fortunate in the fact that the box showed up with everything in it, because I know at the same time Paul was waiting for some camera equipment that never came. It came to customs, stayed in customs, nobody bribed anybody, so it stayed in customs, got sent back to America. And he ended up filming the whole thing on a very small camera. I mean, it looks amazing, but you should have seen what he just had to work. Talk about limitations. For me, I was having a ball. I brought everything I wanted with me, and it showed up, and it all still worked. And I had a lot of fun. You talk about the pigeons, the birds. They were actually in a big space underneath our palace, which is what we had. There was an enormous space that was reverberant, and we used for all of the echo, all the reverb on the record is natural. It just happened to be full of pigeons as well, so you get a lot of that coming through the recording, but it sort of adds something to it. So, in short, if you took, we could have done that with. I mean, it'll work for anyone. It'll work for any situation. Would it? Could we have done it with Radiohead? Yes, I'd dearly love to do that. Could you get them to go there? Probably not.
I mean, it's very pretty. I mean, show them the movie. They might think about it. But Paul,
okay, I'll do that.
Along those lines, obviously the movie is spontaneous to a certain degree and could only be planned in advance so much. But your mind is such a steel trap of cinematic references. Were there any sort of film documentaries you had seen, or people who had shot music in such a way that you had in mind to any extent when you got to the location and were channeling?
Well, I always, Jonathan Demme was the best person to shoot anybody playing music. So I would always have anything Jonathan Demme in my head, whether it would Stop Making Sense or even just a New Order Perfect Kiss video, which just sort of proves that if you just hold on somebody playing music, you'll be all right, if they're interesting. And they're interesting, and Jonathan Demme had said something like, pure cinema is if a filmmaker is filming someone playing music, that kind of rang around. And then funny enough, I got back home and I got this box set sent to me with this film, is it called Tremors? Not the one you're thinking of.
The one with the worms?
Not with Kevin Bacon. But there's a great film about this North African band, and the Film Foundation refurbished it. I was like, fuck, I wish I'd seen this before I went to India. I really could have stolen some good stuff. But it's a great film. I don't remember exactly who made it, but just tried to keep it simple. And there was a limited thing, one room to film these guys, and they were so good that it was easy to find shots.
And Shai, I mean, I know that you had written most of the spine of the music before you actually got to the location, but I'd love to know, and maybe if Natu wants to talk about this as well, how that music was developed once you got there, what the various musicians brought to the table that sort of changed or built on top of the bass that you had brought with you.
So the music itself corresponds with some, I would say, specific Indian traditional musics as far as genre. In that group which we named Rajasthan Express, also maybe I would say that there are few types of musical traditions. So I would end up with Natuji, who would probably could explain best on where he comes from and his tradition comes from. But I would start with those who are not sitting with us now, but you've seen in the film and we would play later. So I'd say one of the elements would be the qawwals. Qawwals are Sufi musicians from Southeast Asia. Sufis are the mystics of Islam. And in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the biggest Sufi order is called Chishtiya, which is named after the Sufi saint Khwaja Mu'inuddin Hassan Chishti, who came from Iran, actually Iran. It was the same region, obviously, in the 12th century, around 12th century. And he came by walking to India, and he brought that message of human brotherhood and love, and he settled in Ajmer. Now, around his shrine, his tomb, his grave, there's a holy shrine where people basically practice different sort of mystical practices throughout, with the help or with music, basically. And that genre of music is called qawwali. And this music is very trance-oriented. The lyrics are all very passionate, and they talk about the relation between the human and the divine. Junun itself, the name is driven from the poetry of one of the Sufi saints from Ajmer. His name is Hazrat Nawab Khadim Hassan Gudri Shah Baba III. And he was a saint and a poet, and so I mean there is this element of this ecstatic, the poetry of love, poetry to God, which is almost when you read the translation, is almost a romantic poetry between could be between a man and a woman or humans, and that sort of romantic notion and feeling. The Sufi poets and mystics have been writing towards God, and the qawwals have been performing it in the Sufi shrines, in the holy tombs. So that, and the style of qawwali from musical point of view is usually has very few musical sentences, that has a lot of elements of repetition. So we have that sort, when you ask me about when I've written some of the composition, So I've spent many, many years in that environment, and somehow this entered into my life, and I find it very inspiring. So some of the melodies have been made in this ambience and this atmosphere. And then when we performed it, some of the things, there's a lot of place for improvisation. It's very elastic. Besides the kawal, we have another tradition you saw in the film of the Manganyars. The Manganyar are also Muslims, gypsies, who used to sing for the royals in Rajasthan, for the Hindu Maharajas. So if the Sufi musicians are devotional musicians, the Manganyar musician, they are entertainer, the masters of entertainments. They've been entertaining the Maharajas for centuries, and this fort where we have recorded, the fort by the Maharaja of Jodhpur, his family is basically patrons of these Manganyar, of this community of Manganyars. So when the musicians, they come to the fort, they always feel very honored. And you can see also at the last, one of the last shots of the film, when the Maharaja comes on that stage, how everybody gives a lot of respect to him. So this is another ingredients of the Rajasthan Express. Then the third ingredient is the brass. The brass tradition arrived to India with the Britishers, with the British Raj, and they've been basically playing in different parades. I've always seen these brass bands playing in weddings, in the streets, in funerals, in holy ceremonies, and I was always fascinated by them. And I always thought, well, maybe one day, I don't know, it sounds so interesting, but they never played together with these other genres. And then when I played it to Johnny, and then Nigel heard it, and they said, well, this is the sound, this should be the sound of the album. At least I remember that. So then we brought the brass in, and the last thing when I said before, so I thought, okay, maybe we can bring drums. You know, we didn't want to make a National Geographic type of an album just to document traditional music. I mean, that was not fascinating. And then Johnny said, cannot we find other drums that are like drum set, but not to bring Western drums? So then I've spoken with my beautiful friend, Mr. Natulal Solanki, who plays the Nagara drums, and Natuji can maybe explain where these drums and the tradition of your drum is coming from.
Hi everybody. Most welcome. Thank you so much. My love and my eyes air make you welcome for me. And thank you for tonight, you most welcome. I'm so happy. When I don't know the journey, I meet first in Shai. And we work Shai with long time. And this is my dream. After this film making and this music making, I never play in my life like this kind of people, like 1 million people, sometimes more than 1 million people. This is our dream. We am so proud that Shai choose us to Muslim and Hindu, both religion. Both religion people. I'm also playing the temple. I born in the temple in Pushkar. Pushkar is a Rajasthani special place. One temple is there, it's called Brahma. This is the Hindu temples, and this is the only one temple in the India. And nobody can make another. Why his wife give him? Why the wife and husband is then the wife tell him, nobody make your puja. Puja is like pray. So only this reason there is one temple there. And my family, 13th generation, we are play the Nagara. Nagara is instrument, is a called like kettle drums. And we play by baguette sticks. And before we are playing like 4 meter, 5 meter. Only big one. This is, and after slowly we brought the small one. And my brother is a very special master for this. And he died on the stage in New York in town hall 12 years ago. The one group is coming, master of percussion. He one time play and second time he play and he already died on the stage. So I'm so lucky to ask again. I sit here with a lot of good musician and I feel very good. And I'm so proud play in Junun And we are lucky to meet Shai Bansur. We are all group, like Hindu or Muslim, we are very happy to 4 years together work them. And we are so proud, play with lot of people, know our music. And we are a lot of traveling with them. And we are so happy. Thank you.
Happy to have you here. Before we get to the performance, I'd love to see if anyone in the audience has a couple of questions. I think we have some time. If you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and you can stand up and shout.
mic's over here.
Or there's a mic. And it's, I don't know where it is because there's very bright lights. But you guys might. Right down here.
My question for Nigel. Actually, what was it like producing music for instruments that you might not have been familiar with? And did they teach instruments to you beforehand so you could know how to like them?
It's actually, yeah, I mean, every single thing was, apart from the guitar and the bass, is something I've never even seen before. But actually, the thing is that they play together. I mean, you can see when they play together in the room, it's very cohesive as a sound, you know, and they're used to playing together, and it's quite easy because of that. You know, there was, most of the record was done, tracked with them playing in the room, so really you can just hear what it should sound like, and then you just make it, try and recreate that. And then any additional stuff is just, you know, it's mainly vocals and little overdubs and melodic things, whatever. So it wasn't, you know, I have no knowledge of this man's craft, really. He's definitely, you know, all of them, they all. More interesting was just seeing them not being used to being recorded, if you know what I mean. It was like working around, trying to stick microphones in places where they weren't quite comfortable, and that was a little tussle, a little bit of push and pull there for a bit. But generally, it's just, it's easy, it's kind of easy. It's a little bit like, you know, having a string section that just sounds, you stand in front of it and you can hear it, so you sort of just try and recreate that. It was all very positive, anyway.
I think there's a line of questions over there. Or...
Hi, my name's Melissa, and this question is for Johnny. So obviously you've been pretty busy lately with Radiohead and composing of Phantom Thread. I'm curious what was different about this creative process for you in the creating of Junun, and what was maybe inspiring to you versus you know, your work with Radiohead and in your composing of film scores.
It was more about just trying to talk Shai into an approach of how it's funny when lots of Westerners go to India and make music or record music with lots of respect, but sometimes it feels a bit like there's too much respect. It's like they're too wary to make anything, but there's a real roughness to some of his music, and the way the brass bands play, especially, you know, when they're following processions down weddings of back streets of Jodhpur, it's not about sort of music for relaxation and the kind of the idea of. I think lots of people miss the point of Indian music and don't hear the tension in it, or the excitement or the passion, and we were just responding to that. I remember we did lots of the singing with Zaki and Zakir. We had them standing with some pedals like this, just simple delay pedals, and they were holding microphones, and it was like a kind of, it was a little bit hip hop. You know what I mean? It was the way they were standing and just sort of shouting into
Actually,
microphones.
that is something that was kind of unusual. Was doing working with those guys doing vocals and stuff was fascinating, because of course you don't understand what they're saying. And also it's true to say that some of the singers, the girls, were singing in a different language that they understood, so they didn't know. They were being taught phonetically how to sing this stuff. So all of those kind of things were definitely, yeah, and then just, you're right, like trying
Keeping it rough a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a slightly sort of hi-fi obsession approach to recording world music that we find a bit off-putting.
You're quite right, yeah, it's true. It's no dirt or grunge to it. Sure.
So, firstly, just want to acknowledge and thank all the immense talent, and it's the congruence and confluence of all you gentlemen that made this really refreshing album that's stayed new and fresh to me every time I've listened. Can we expect more music from this outfit?
Well, so we were standing at the back for the first half of this film, getting very nostalgic and talking about, you know, how we do
how we move on and do it again. So I mean, we're talking about
Hopefully.
it.
Can I just say as well, just one thing? I know I talk a lot, but I can't really communicate just how well this film communicates our experience, my experience. I could say, I'm sure I could speak for you too. Just the whole kind of anarchy and craziness of India and all of those little episodes that Paul so craftily, artistically put together in a way that plays back to me when I watched it finally. It just made me really nostalgic. It made me miss it because it was such an accurate representation of. I mean, it really, really is very true what you see. It's kind of, you know. So yeah, even just I haven't seen it for a little bit, and just watching it again, I just was remembering the magic of that whole thing. It really was magic. I mean, like I said before, but he's quite good. Turns out.
I just have a Radiohead question, if that's okay.
No.
I just want to know, Johnny, how did you write the guitar solos to Paranoid Android? Like, what scales are those? What was the process? How did you do that?
So now, sincerely, my wife is tapping her watch and yawning and saying, "Come on, when are you going to play some music?" Not at you, but at us talking. I think she's like, "Why aren't you playing music?" So I can't. How do I write it? I can't remember. I mean, just for the fun of it, it was just, you know what. Genuinely, how I wrote it was not knowing what the notes are that high up the fretboard and just choosing a pattern, and so it was done quite freely and not thought out. Is the answer.
Well, another question along those lines is, you've been the subject of a documentary at least once before about Radiohead called Meeting People is Easy that was decidedly less joyful than this film, but enjoyable for fans nonetheless. But now that you have this great working relationship with Paul, is it conceivable that you could make another tour documentary or a concert documentary now that you're in a different place in your lives?
With some laughs in it, you mean?
Sure. I laugh a little bit at Meeting People is Easy, but that's just me.
I like an awkward silence, like a big. I don't know. Yeah, you know. I don't know. We want to play.
All right. Are we? We have time for another question before the performance.
So the music in this film is unquestionably devotional. It's very religious. I, as a Jewish person, connect to it very deeply, and I've listened to it so many times, just getting into a very deep space. So, Shah, you spoke quite a bit about the places that other participants in this album came from, but there's a Hebrew element as well, and I was wondering if you would just talk about what it means to you.
Yes. Well, yeah, okay, it goes back to, I grew up in Israel, and when I played music since I was a young boy, and different sorts of bands, and different tradition, obviously. And when I heard Indian music, I was just at the end of my high school, and I was so taken by it that I decided that I must go to India and just see a bit of where it comes from, because I was so fascinated by the music. I never knew that I would end up spending over 15 years there. And at the beginning, I went to study. I studied music in the traditional manner. Indian music, as I already said a bit about that, runs within families. It's an oral tradition, and it is being taught as an oral tradition. So I basically went to a master, and I lived with him. And I remember that the music was fascinating, and I was so moved by it. And I lived there. It was very, very hard period. I remember, was, waking up at 4 o'clock, singing one note for 2 hours, then the rag and everything until 11 o'clock in the night. It was very, very intense for me, and I was the only foreigner. And then I remember that one day I went sometime at the small slots that I had for myself, and I would read poetry just to comfort my own loneliness at that point. And I read in the book of Hazrat Jalaluddin Rumi in his Masnavi, is a very famous Sufi mystic and poet. I think many people who knows about Rumi. And there's in the introduction of the Masnavi, he says, a man who does not speak his language becomes dumb, even if he learned 100 songs. And as I read that, it felt so true. And I felt I'm that person who becomes dumb. I'm learning a musical language which has no borders to it, but I was learning to sing in language that didn't really mean at the time so much to me. I didn't know at the time the language. So I just started to express my own feelings in the language which is of where I come from, which is Hebrew. So this is how I started writing poetry in Hebrew, expressing my own personal dialogue and feeling within the musical language of North Indian music. So I think this is how this process have started and evolved. That started many years ago. And in the album we have basically language. The language is in one of the songs. It says something. ליהודים יהודי, למוסלמים מוסלמי, בכל לשון בה אדבר, אחת שפתי. To the Jews, I'm a Jew. To the Muslim, a Muslim. In every language that I'll speak, in every dialect that I'll speak, my language is one. Allah Elohim, which is like basically, that is a one language. So beyond the language, there is a one language, and that's what I feel, and I feel very happy that I think this got to that expression by the album and by the film that Paul has made, which also, for me as a viewer, the fact that there's not really an identity for the people as individuals or to a storyline. There's just that oneness that happens in that room, which is music and basically the feeling of unity.
That's a beautiful note to end it on. Thank you so much for talking about the movie with us. And we'll now clear the stage and listen to you guys perform.